And we see this play out with people who win the lottery. And this is something that many Americans are going through. I was reading somewhere that anywhere from 20 to 30% of people making over six figures, so over $100,000, are also living paycheck to paycheck. So it isn't necessarily an income problem. For many people living paycheck to paycheck, it is a lifestyle problem more so than an income problem. Because if you have people with a very large income unable to get their lives together, then it shows that if you took people who are struggling right now that don't have a large income and you gave them a large income, they likely would continue to struggle. And we see this play out with people who win the lottery. A lot of people who participate in the lottery are not exactly financially savvy to begin with, and then when you give them millions and billions of dollars, they spend it all within a short period of time, and then they're right back to where they were before. So in many cases, it is a habit problem living paycheck to paycheck. Now, before I go on, I know there are people living paycheck to paycheck. It is not a habit problem, and it is likely an income problem, because there are people that are very frugal and still living paycheck to paycheck, and the likely cause of that is an income issue there. So I understand that it's not a one-size-fits-all situation here, but you have to really re-examine yourself, look yourself in the mirror and say, is this financial situation that I'm in, is it a habit problem, or is it a income problem, or maybe it's a cost of living problem too, wherever you're living at. So I'm going to take this time to talk about some things that people do that keep them living paycheck to paycheck and ways to break free from that problem. So the first thing is living in the moment. There's lots of people that the reason why they're living paycheck to paycheck is because they're living in the now and they're not thinking about the future bills that are coming down the line, but they're also not thinking about the past and what they have spent yesterday or 3 days ago. And so they're not aware of what their financial situation is in the moment. Instead, they're thinking about, well, I want that thing that I'm seeing in the store or on Amazon or whatever. I want that right now. So I'm going to buy it because I want it now. I'm living in the moment. So the best way to counteract living in the moment and instead thinking about the future or thinking about what you have already done in the past, you need to be tracking your expenses. Now, this is not as difficult as it was back in the day. You have many apps out there that can do this for you. The bank that my wife and I use tracks our expenses. There is an app, and we can go and look at it for ourselves. We use that app in addition to the EveryDollar app that we use to track our expenses. So it's not as hard as it sounds. There are many other apps out there you could use that also will track your expenses and could potentially even link up with your bank account. So you don't even have to sit down and do it for yourself. It'll do it for you. So you need to start tracking your expenses and pick a day. Any day in the week, any day that works for you, probably a day where you're chilling and not doing as much work. Pick a day and make that your tracking day. The day where you sit down and say, okay, how did we do this week, or how are we doing right now in this week, and what adjustments need to be made going forward. Because if you're tracking your expenses, you're less likely to get caught up in that living into the moment and then looking and saying, oh man, I have no money in my account and I have 3 days until my next paycheck. What am I going to do? How am I going to make this work? I guess I got to get the credit card out. That's called living in the moment, and that's keeping you stuck living paycheck to paycheck. So again, track your expenses. Here's the next thing that's keeping people stuck living paycheck to paycheck. And that is thinking about things in payments in the first place. If you're thinking about everything in payments, so you're making payments on Amazon, you're making payments on your car, you're making payments on your house, you're making payments on credit cards, you're making payments everywhere else. If you're thinking about everything in payments, it makes it seem like you can afford a lot of things, right? Because you look at your paycheck and then you compare it to the payments you want to make, and you're saying, well, I can afford that. I can afford $30 a month. I can afford $150 a month. I can afford this, that, and the other. And when you have so many payments stacking up in your life, you start to forget about the payments, the obligations that you have already committed to for that month or for the many months ahead. And so when you get your paycheck, you feel like you have a lot of money, but you fail to realize that a lot of that paycheck is already claimed. It's already called for. The money is already dedicated to this payment and this payment and this payment and this payment that you've already made, or committed to, I should say. So then you realize very quickly you actually don't have as much money as you thought you did because you've already committed it to so many other things. So we can't be thinking about things in payments because that's how we get caught with payments up to our eyeballs, as Dave Ramsey would say. And then we're living paycheck to paycheck because we're committed to all these payments. This is how people, there's a term, it's called being house poor. So this is how people get caught being house poor. They look at, say, a payment that they think they could make, a mortgage payment, and they say, well, here's what my paycheck is, here's what the house payment would be. We can do that. And the mortgage is so high, it's such a large percentage of their income that they can't afford other things. All of a sudden, they need to cut back on groceries. They need to cut back on this. They need to cut back on that. And if an emergency comes up and they need to pay for something, say to fix that house that they now have a large payment on, they can't afford that because all their money is committed to something. All their money is tied up in these payments that they thought they could make. So this is why sometimes you can see people on the outside, they look like they're doing well. They look like they are rich because they got all this stuff, all these material things, but really they're drowning in payments. And if you ask them for $20, they couldn't even give that to you because even though they're making a high income, all the money is claimed. All the money is already tied up. And so they have no discretionary funds to pay for anything else because it's all tied up. So you can't be thinking about your life in payments. Don't be doing that. You're eventually going to get surprised by how many payments you have committed to and then get stuck living paycheck to paycheck because of that. So how do we break free from thinking about things in payments? Well, what you got to do is you got to start thinking about saving. You got to start thinking about, if I want this thing, I need to create a sinking fund. I need to start saving a little every month so that I can afford that thing. Here's the beauty of saving versus payments. When you're saving for something versus making payments for something, if you have a bad month, you can cut back on the savings temporarily so that you can afford the other emergencies or things that you got to do, and then reinstitute the savings the next month. You can't do that necessarily with payments unless you want to pay late fees or have your credit score get hurt. So you can't, say, hey, I'm going to do an IOU. I need to skip this month for payments. That's not possible. You're going to get penalties for that. But you don't have that problem when you are saving. So if you have things that you want, you need to practice some patience and say, okay, I can't afford it now. I'm going to start saving now so that eventually I can get that thing. And that will protect you from getting caught up in this paycheck to paycheck cycle. Cut back on those payments. I'm not saying you got to have all the payments gone, although I think being debt-free is very good. But if you're not somebody who's cares that much about being debt-free and you're okay with payments, then you just need to cut back on some of those payments. Don't commit so much of your money every single month to creditors where then you're not going to have anything for emergencies or other things that you want in life for that particular month. The next thing that's keeping people living paycheck to paycheck is not having a plan. There is a large number of people, anywhere from 40 to 50%, that are just not budgeting at all. They're not having a plan at all. And when you don't have a plan, that is how you get caught living in the moment, getting payments, all those things I previously talked about. And then you get caught up in this paycheck to paycheck cycle. Not having a plan is also how you look up one day, 30 years from now, and say, wow, I have no retirement. Wow, I don't own anything. Wow, what has happened to all the money that I've been making over these years? I've got nothing to show for it. That's what happens when you don't create a plan. So how do we get out of that problem? Well, we get out of that problem by budgeting, as I just mentioned a second ago. When you create a budget, that means you're creating a plan, which means you can then start to set up goals and accomplish bigger things in life, such as saving for retirement, getting out of debt, getting those nice things that you want without having to regret it later and pay for it in a higher amount and, like I said, regret it later. So create a budget. It doesn't have to be perfect. Even if it's 90% accurate, that's better than having no plan at all. So I know we've already started this month of January. Start thinking about February. Start thinking about how you're going to start setting up a budget for that, and then start sticking to that. I think you will see yourself find a lot more progress in your finances and find yourself getting a little bit more leeway, a little bit more freedom, and not living paycheck to paycheck.